everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave. I am your host, along with my co host. His name is Gregory, aka
Greg,
Greg.
also known as. You don't get the
G
Gregory a lot, but
G Reg,
that's right. Some people say that.
but it just stands for like regular Greg,
I'm pretty regular, especially lately.
regular ass Greg. That's what
That's
we
right.
call him.
Basic Greg. And
Then
Greg's are pretty basic as far as people go.
don't we typically call you Vanilla Greg?
Yeah. Yeah.
Basic.
All compliments, really, if you think about
Really,
it. Yeah.
truly.
What does David Byrne say? Dare to be ordinary or dare to be average. By calling me average, you're saying I'm better than, I don't know, 4 billion people. I'll take
Is
it.
that how many people are not average?
Well, I mean, you say just if you're saying average, you're basically
Ooh,
saying like the median person, right? And if to say
Greg.
if we're getting close to 8 billion people on the planet,
The fact that you're referring to some people as not average is not very person-centered theory of you.
yeah. Well, you know
If
how I feel
if
about
anybody's
person.
listening to the Kyle Rogers episode, they'll know what I'm talking about.
You're right. It's not.
You're telling them
It's
they're not
not.
enough, you know,
Me, I'm fine with average. In every way.
in every way. Okay.
All right.
Well, I
Now
don't know
that
what that means, but okay.
well, Dave, read between the lines. So listen, or maybe I'm not. Maybe I do have 4 children. So,
Oh boy,
um, anyways, here we go.
off the rails.
Here we go. Back. Let's guide this thing back on track. So, Dave, we do a lot of episodes about books. I don't know if I would say a lot now that I'm saying that. Um, but this
Yeah, like we've done
is like four.
3 to 4 episodes on
Yeah,
books.
yeah, yeah. But this is technically an episode about a book, but it's not so much
Mm,
about a book. It's more about a story. And in the book that we're going to be talking about a little bit, and not so much the book, but it's it's about stories, right? It's a
Plot
story.
lines,
And it's like,
storylines.
yeah, yeah. So like, and I think stories are incredibly important. I love stories.
Wait, we're doing an episode about story outlines. How boring does that sound? Please do not judge this until you listen, everyone.
I know, I know.
Everyone
Isn't
just
that kind of
tuned
funny
out
though?
right now.
Yeah,
We're
but
not even doing it. We're not even doing a book. We're not doing a story. We're doing the outline of a story. What the hell?
well, yeah, like what makes a story a story? Dave, how important are stories? Like we literally like our quality of life, our potential, our happiness, our sense of self. It's all based on the stories we tell ourselves. And so this book about story is not just about stories. It's about us. It's about what humans are, what makes us ourselves. Because essentially, what this book is saying is that we all have the same story in a way. Like we all have to go on this journey, and we all have to face the same obstacles. And there's a hero in all of us. And if we sort of follow this framework, then we should have a meaningful life, right? And this book is The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell, who essentially, you know, you hear him being called, like touted as this brilliant psychologist, this, philosopher, this all these great things. But what he essentially is just a collector of stories, someone who, gathers myths. He's like what's those guys? The Grimms, but
Myth
different.
collectors,
Yeah.
myth gatherers, I believe they're called.
Yeah, like that old show on Discovery Channel, Myth Gatherers.
um, More importantly than anything you just said, the topic today is a hero's journey.
hmm
All right. So
Yeah.
we have to say that because that is the topic, not his book, not Joseph Campbell himself, but the hero's journey and perhaps the universality of it, or perhaps not, depending on who you ask.
It's depending on who you ask. So I'm interested in see where you're going with that. So first, just to give it an honorable mention, because we will kind of use it a little bit and its framework. A Hero with a Thousand Faces is just a book about myths. That's what it is. And instead of looking at how myths are different, what Joseph Campbell tried to figure out is through all major religions and stories throughout cultures, he tried to figure out like what they all had in common. So he everywhere he goes, he sees this what he called a monomyth, which is essentially what we'll be calling the hero's journey. And it's this story arc that's just the human experience. And it's the human experience that we should experience should we have the courage to do so, you know?
You're right.
Yeah. So like I guess it's like this single myth told 1,000 different ways. And we see it in every movie we've ever seen. Dave, we talked about The Alchemist. It's that. It's, Trolls. It's The Lord of the Rings. It's The
Yeah.
Hobbit. It's everything.
I mean, you know the thing that drives me a little bit bonkers?
What's that?
He essentially just looked at other people's stories, came up with the common themes, and then like also found like these there is like what would the word be?
Structure,
There is
pattern?
a structure. That's
Yeah.
exactly the word. There is a structure to almost every story for entertainment value because you want to show like an arc for a character, right? Character arc.
Yeah.
That's what it is. That's all it is. But he coined this phrase, right? Or did he not?
He did. He did.
And now he's like a legend amongst legends.
It sounds like you're kind of, I don't know, not
I
into
came up with this on my own without before I even knew this with my final girl outline. And
I
you
know.
said the hero's journey after I kind of described it to you. And I never really like, and then now I'm like digging into hero's journey. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah, it's like pointing out the obvious, but it's like hard to do that. It's harder than, like so many things are so simple. Like what's justice? What's courage? What's time? Like all these things are like very simple concepts, but it really does take someone to point out the simplicity of it and be like, and then people are like, "That's brilliant. Thank you for that."
yeah. And you know, I a while ago, ages ago, I heard this statement that every single plot outline that can exist exists in the Bible. Is that true? Or is
Look,
it just a bunch of heroes' journeys over being told over and over again?
so yeah, you could say that that's true. You literally could, because according to Joseph Campbell, there's only one basic plot line. So you're going to find it in the Bible, but you're also going to find it in the Quran. You're going to find it in the Torah. You're going to find it through, in Mesopotamia. You're going to find it in, Sumerian cultures. Gilgamesh,
Keep going,
it,
keep going.
yeah, like so, like the Epic of,
Name it up a bunch of other religions, Bibles. Go ahead.
yeah, I can't do it anymore, dude. The Talmud.
Oh,
You find like the first story found, I think, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the
class. That's a
oldest.
banger right there.
It's a banger. It's a flood story, and it's got this
Wait, isn't it
same
from the
arc.
Smurfs?
No, it's not. That's Gargamel, but good job. Yeah. No, I know. It's like they all have this transformative thing, and what's interesting is like we've been talking about this a little bit lately, about like by accident. We've mentioned how you know I think what motivates us is to do good, right? Like we should be acting towards good, hopefully, right? That's what we're all kind of trying to do. That should be our motivation. And what a hero does is they get to a point where they say, I don't care about like what's unjust and unfair or like my circumstances. I'm going to do good. I'm going to be something bigger than I'm supposed to be. I'm going to step out of this place. And if we have that sort of mentality, then like once you say like anything that can happen to me doesn't matter because I have values and I'm following them. It's like that's kind of beautiful. And that kind of, if you can have this vision of the future, that kind of is the antidote to any anxiety and depression. If you can see where you want to be and have this vision of a hopeful, bright future that, you know, you're doing something that's like bigger than you for something that's not you and just making, it meaningful and big. I think that's pretty cool.
But it does end up being for you as well because
Hmm.
you changed through that process and the former you is now expanded or maybe even like behind you depending on your circumstances. But the other thing that is like really important to note is like the way that you just described it minimizes the difficulty, and I think that's not something that is true in the way he describes it, because there are
Okay.
all these, and I'm not saying like you described it poorly. I would never dare to say that, Greg.
Listen, I'm only getting started.
But what I will say is like when you the way you frame it, like, oh, becoming like, yes, all that's well and good, but what it does highlight though is that there are people telling you turn around, don't go forward. There are all these fears and challenges and things that you have to like determine, am I going to go forward? And many times people probably don't because they're held back. So like a hero's journey is only a hero's journey for someone who's willing to embrace it. Others
Right, and the
don't.
outline's there for you. Like, that's kinda what we're saying, like, the
Yeah.
outline's there for you, should you be willing to accept it? And I think, like, one of the best versions of this, we've mentioned this way back, is Elf, because it's so hard, because I don't wanna minimize it, because 'cause you're right, because it's like, "Hey, I need to forget who I am right now. Whoever I am right now kind of needs to die in order for me to become who I'm supposed to
Yeah.
be." And that's
Death is
hard.
important. The
That's
death
hard.
of yourself is important during this.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the framework a little bit. So
Yeah.
there's the ordinary world, your starting point. What
Which
you know
every
of the
which every story starts with, always. Like anytime
yeah.
you watch a movie, you read a book, you're in the ordinary world. Even if you're in an not ordinary world, like The Hobbit, which is a
Yeah.
great example of that, right?
Yeah,
Um,
you're in your ordinary world.
whatever your ordinary world is, there's usually a description, there's usually some kind of like storyline, character building, or just your life, right?
And you're like in this position, there's not much expected of you. Like I'm thinking of like the Hobbits and Lord of the Rings. You're just kind of like you could go on
You
like this
exist.
thinking, yeah, just
And
just existing,
that's
never
kind of what I
knowing
mean.
you're not
Yeah.
meant for more.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, there's so many times we don't even realize that we have the opportunity to take a hero's journey, or we don't do it because we're like, well, I don't have to. Like, I'm fine if I don't, right? Like, a
Yeah,
hobbit
and
can still be
that's
hobbiting all over the place if like he just doesn't do what he did, right?
yeah, no, it's interesting that you say that because it's like so but without it, you don't become something that you never thought you could be. But we're living in a society now where it's becoming easier and easier and easier to be comfortable where you're at and more difficult to stand out.
And I think we're saying that because like the perspective we have of just like seeing people all the time and all that, but I'm sure that's always been the case. Like I'm sure there's
Yeah.
always been an ability to just be super complacent, or maybe even that was like a general attitude at some points in time. Like you don't overcome your current situations, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so that's where we're starting.
Yeah.
But then there's a call to adventure and you see that there's a larger world out there and there's more that you could be a part of if you want to be,
Yeah.
if you dare to
Yeah.
be.
So that calling is like I heard it referred to as like a vocation. It's
Yeah,
this
sure.
thing that you're meant to do, or that you're called to do, and it's that thing that will change us into the person that we will be. And if there
Yeah, and
is
it could
no
be a
calling, there
choice.
is yeah, if there's no calling, there's no change. We'll just stay the same.
So it could be like, you know, like going off to the military, and now that could be a choice. That could be a willing choice. But then there's been times where there's been drafts and you're thrust into it. Like, your village is attacked. I don't know. So anything can happen. You're thrust into the hero's journey. Or you can choose to leave. Like, there's more for me out there. I'm just gonna set out.
You know what character does not take a hero's journey? And it's really an or maybe he does. Let's see what your thought is. We have actually done a few books now that I think about it. We did Things Fall Apart
I thought
with
about it during
a Conquo, right? And his hero's journey, what would that have been?
So he was refusing the call, I think, and which is the next step. But he was refusing to see that he was living in a way that was limiting his family and limiting himself. And I think, the hero's journey for him would have been to find a way to kind of lead his people instead of be conquered, I
So
think.
he did not take the hero's journey.
No,
And yeah,
like, and that's a part of it too. So like, the next part is actually what we're talking about here, and that's the refusal of the call. And how many people have been like, I want to be a doctor, I want to be an astronaut, I want to be the president, election day. Um, and then they start to tell themselves, no, I don't think I can really do that. Or they start to come up with reasons that make sense why they can't, go on and become this thing they wanted to be or think they should be. They create these limiting beliefs. We see that constantly, don't we?
it was like when you used to constantly talk about wanting to be a chocolatier. And I was like, Greg, just
And I was
Do
like,
it,
"There's not
dude.
really a market like there used to be."
Like, Greg, everyone wants to try your delicious chocolates. Who are you kidding?
I don't have purple suits. I don't know what's gonna happen to me. No, but you want to know where I see it a lot? I see when I have like I'm thinking of a very specific 18-year-old, and he is surrounded by he's kind of like grown up in poverty, and his step dad and his mom are kind of pushing him in the direction of, hey, look, like you got an ADHD diagnosis. Maybe we can like, he's always like, well, what do I got to do to get like SSI or something like that? And I'm like, is that, I mean, eh, is that what you want? Or do you want to maybe become something more? Now, here's someone who like no one is expecting anything of him. But if he thrusts himself out there, like who knows what he could be? Like so it's like he's convincing himself like, hey, I can only be so much. And it's like that who says that's true? Why is that true? And maybe the next step for him is meeting the mentor, and that's where I step in. Perhaps.
Wow.
Right, Dave?
Perhaps. Yeah, yeah. Absolutely.
And who like we can think of 1,000 cases of this on a hero's journey. Like you meet the mentor and they convince the hero to kind of go on or give them.
So
I mean, like
so
Merlin.
so your example was interesting because I actually thought you were going to go a different way with
Okay.
that because we have shared a patient in the past, and
Yes.
actually he's who I thought you were going to say, because we both at some point hit a little bit of a roadblock because this individual just lacked any desire to change the current situation of their life, which they were very, very not pleased with. And
Yeah.
anytime we encourage them to take that big leap, we were often met with resistance to the point where it became like, well, I don't honestly know what we're going to do because anytime we've tried to give you that encouragement, and then he did take a few steps, but there was always
Yeah.
something that brought it back. And then I think that can sometimes cause people to feel like, well, I guess I'm just not that person that's meant to make change, right?
Yeah. Because like, are you gonna you're embarking on a hero's journey, whatever that looks like to you. Now, are you gonna run into some pushback? Well, shit, I hope so. Because if you don't,
Right.
like you're not gonna be transformed. That's the thing that transforms you.
And so that's the thing that people get caught up on. They don't see that yeah, that pushback or that hurdle. They see that as like the giving up point versus like that's your struggle, that's your challenge that you have to overcome. Or all right, now you've just gotten, thrown off course this direction, make something of that. That doesn't mean your journey's
Right.
over. That's a step in the journey. Like people sometimes get thrown off because they think their journey is a clear path, but it rarely ever is a clear path. Actually, it just dawned on me that I have this individual I have this conversation with all the time. He gets these ideas of things that he wants to work towards. And as soon as something comes up, there's a roadblock in the way. I have to almost like outline it. I draw pictures on the a
Yeah.
whiteboard for him because it's like you got to see that this is a roadblock. And that doesn't mean your journey's over. It just means you have to figure out how to overcome this and that maybe your journey is going to take a different path right now. And then maybe at some point you have to figure out what the next step is after that. Stop thinking everything's going to be so predictable and I'm going to do this, and this, and then I'm going to get to there. It's like that's not how it goes for any of us.
No, it's almost like the path is revealed on the path. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? It's like you have to run into obstacles to understand like what is worthwhile. What it molds you. It sort of
it builds the character of you while you're on your journey. Like me and you both took a journey at one point in time
yeah.
and we made a leap to do something that was out of both of our comfort zones, working with individuals in a different capacity than we had ever done so, and trying to pursue this direction. And then we got hit with one of the biggest hurdles that we could have ever never would have imagined. A freaking plague breaks
Yeah.
out and suddenly we can't even like practice the way that most people have learned to practice, and we had to like totally reroute the way that we were going to learn, the way that we were going to like actually actively engage in this work in this field. And think about all the things that like now looking back, if we didn't have that, I never would have learned really how to like do therapy over Zoom. Or I would have
I know,
it
and
would
that's
we
a
had
huge
to
part of it
learn.
now.
Yeah, we're so much better for it. But
Yeah,
also, look what else came out of it. We're doing freaking podcasts over the internet like
I
this,
know.
and just so many different things. And that's, as we look back, we're like, well, hey, I guess we're coming out of this a lot better. It was a really tough time, but we're coming out of
Had
it
it been
stronger.
easy, had it been smooth, we would have been we would have never gotten any good at it, right? We
Right.
would have never and some people still might say we're not, but we are definitely, like, working towards that, right? Like, we're getting
Yeah.
like, we
Oh,
we
I
try
I
harder.
feel I feel like it was one of those things that being able to push through that and stay motivated and continue that journey made us stronger in the end
Oh, yeah,
in
we
many
saw
ways.
plenty of people who sort of didn't come out the other side,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so
Mhm.
we see that. So we reached this point, and this is a part of the hero's journey where we cross this threshold, quote unquote, and we move from like what our comfort zone into a world where we have no idea what's going on. Like there's no turning back. And that's where I think a lot of people are afraid. Like you're in a job, like we both were, very comfortable with it, and it's like, "Look, I can just stay here forever, and if I change jobs or if I change, like, whatever in life, it's like there's no turning back," and that can be really scary because like, I'm something here. It's almost like that movie Big Fish, where it's like, "I'm something here. Do I really wanna go somewhere where I'm, like, nothing again, and I'm gonna have to rebuild who I am?" That's really scary, right? That's
Yeah.
really scary. So there's gonna be people in your life saying, "Hey, like, why would you leave this job?" Or, "Hey, like, I don't know if is that right for you? Are you gonna like that?" People who are kind of, I don't know, trying to hold you down a little bit, and it's like you have to have this idea of who you wanna be and keep pushing forward, and I
Those
think
are
that's an important part of it.
those are the threshold monsters.
Absolutely.
Those the ones telling you to turn around. That's in every fantasy story and all that.
Can you give us an example of that?
I don't know the names of characters from like Lord of the Rings, but isn't there a character at some point that tells them to turn around or um as
Always.
yeah, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but
You know
like
what's funny? Like, I was, like, reading a couple little articles that Joseph Campbell wrote, and he was talking about dragons are a good example of this, where it's like and they kind of, like, represent greed too, which I had never thought of
mm,
because they're usually around a bunch of gold, and you remember when we talked about the 7 deadly sins where it's like greed is it's not like using money to get something. It's like money is like the purpose. So like a dragon, they usually are guarding virgins or they're guarding gold, and they don't really have a use for either one of those things. They're just hoarding it to hoard it. And
yeah.
I think that's like super interesting. There's a lot of like little interesting things where he kind of like picks apart little, you know, the myths in his mind tell us the stories of like what it's like to be human in like almost every facet. It's really interesting. So, but back to this though, yeah, you're gonna have people who really push back on you, but you're also gonna have people who kind of help you out. I think that's an important thing to mention too, because along your journey, like you can never make a journey by yourself.
Right.
So there's going to be people along the way who you're going to have to lean on for help and advice, and don't be afraid to do that.
Who are those people?
I mean, allies,
Homies?
homies,
Yeah.
fellow, like I keep thinking it's so natural to think of the Lord of the Rings because you have like a group of people, but I mean, Joseph Campbell was friends with, I'm sure you came across this, but he was friends with George Lucas.
Yeah.
And
Star Wars.
George Lucas pretty much used all of this, like, you know, piece by piece to kind of construct this
It
whole, Star Wars,
really makes me
universe.
wish I've seen more than one Star Wars movie because I would be throwing out those references all over the place.
You've only seen like
Just
really?
the first. Yeah, just one.
You stopped at one, huh?
I just watched
That's
it like somewhat in the last year, I guess.
it's pretty good. I guess you had to be there. Maybe you missed the time. Maybe it's nostalgia to me, but I think
I
they're
mean, it's
great.
not bad. Yeah.
All right. Well, so what do you think about this like approach phase? Like it's like idea that there's like this imposing destination, something that has to challenge you, and this is what we're talking about, where it's like you can't grow without some difficulty, like the ordeal, this conflict. You can lose it all or even die. Like it's literally that serious. Like you kind of Joseph Campbell, and remember, these are all heroes' journeys, so they've got to be kind of interesting. But this is like real life stuff too. I really think like you have to go try to do something bigger than you to make your life worthwhile. I really do believe that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
I'm not going to say your life isn't worthwhile if you don't, but it definitely helps to bring purpose and meaning and just positive reinforcement to yourself and all those good feelings of like strength, and it does provide something
It
that
does.
if you don't take those journeys you will never feel or never
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something like really, and it's hard to kind of put it into words, but I don't know, it's hard to explain. The next part is seizing the reward, and this is like once you've slain the enemy, whatever that is, um, you take the treasure, whatever that is. It could be a person, it could be money, really big, and now you're kind of at this point that he calls apotheosis, and this is when a hero like this. Uh-oh, did I lose you?
No.
Oh, okay. So this is when a hero often, like they come to this moment where it's like, when you finally have to do this big thing, or you finally have to like do this job, and you've gotten to this job like us, where like you've gotten to this yourself into this position where you're gonna need every single hardship and moment of growth to manifest in you like an all in one single moment. And that's what he talks about with apotheosis, where it's like there's going to be this time in your life where all this pain and suffering and work just kind of all pays off. And I think of Bloodsport. I think of Rocky training for the Russian. It's like those upside down pull-ups or whatever they like sit-ups, they all kind of like come together in one moment where you can kind of make this thing happen.
There was another concept, and I don't know which of these steps that it falls in, is where the character gains a new weapon.
Okay.
He picks up a new weapon. It could be a sword, it could be, whatever it is. And
Hmm.
that represents like the gaining of a new skill. So I think that's another aspect. I think that would fall into like one of these last two that we just talked. Like as you're on this journey and you're battling or you're overcoming these challenges and obstacles, you're also picking up new skills, or you're tapping into sides of yourself that you've never had to tap into, because you have to like become a fully functioning person in a way. So if you're like someone who's kind of soft spoken, you might have to find that bold part of yourself, or if, vice versa. If you're someone who's very bold and direct, you might have to find that more nurturing side of yourself or something along those lines. But you have to tap into things that you never had use for in the past.
That's so interesting that
Didn't
you
know
say
you
that.
existed. Yeah.
It's like reminds me of like Thomas Jefferson used to write about stuff like this, where he would say like the greatest gift on earth is to be able to work hard at work worth doing. And I think like what you're saying is, imagine finding yourself in a position where it's like every skill you've ever had to work for your entire life just is useful like all at once. Like being able to be useful in so many different ways and have that usefulness be used. It's like there's something super powerful about that. Like putting yourself like it's almost like the man in the arena idea, where it's like you've put yourself in a situation where you have to show up, like this is your moment, and it's make or break. And I think that that's like we're all kind of looking for that opportunity to
Mm,
just kind of rise to the occasion. And it's scary, but look, that's those moments are great. Those are great moments. If you've ever felt like you've just killed it, you just, like everything that you learned kind of was useful here in this moment. I'm sure you've had a moment like that in session, right? Where it's like even and it's not just what you learned in school, but it's like in your life, things that you've learned or things that you failed at or things that were hard for you, you see in this other person, you're like, I know almost exactly how you feel, and I feel like I can really put myself there and help you through this.
sure.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then essentially you're coming back. That's about the whole end of this, where it's like you're coming back home, like in The Alchemist or The Hobbit, or even veterans. Like sometimes you've become so used to that chaotic world that you forget what it's like to be in this normal world, and you almost become this master of two worlds. So it's like you return home, but you've changed, and these gifts that you've learned, like, so it's almost like all this hardship and the struggles that you went through are now gifts that you've learned and blessings, and you can help others with them. And you know, you kind of have to like reconcile who you were with who you are now, and you become sort of someone who has wisdom that they're able to pass down to other people, children, people who are heading out on their own heroes' journeys. So it's like this is so necessary, right?
Yeah.
As a part of like human development.
Right. Right. Um, so let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you think that this is a universal experience?
I mean, it's hard to say. I think you have to, if you can see it and distill it down to like what a hero's journey is very sort of, it's all over the map. It doesn't have to be this like great thing that your call to action is like this huge calling, but does everyone have something that they can work towards that's like greater than themselves, and they can do good for others and do good in the world? Yeah, I think it is sort of universal.
Yeah.
Do you not?
So I think it's two separate things. Then that's the reason why, like, and even in the beginning, I wanted to specify our episode here is about a hero's journey. It's not
Yeah.
about Thompson. It's not about Hero with Thousand Faces. That is part of it, obviously, because that is kind of what has brought to light this structure and kind of identified it. However, like his way of describing it and his books have examples and ideas that are more his, right?
Mhm.
So I think that what I've understood is that in his way of describing things, sometimes he has ways that feel um it's very individual, right?
Yeah.
And it almost minimizes the community experience. And for example, one of the things that was highlighted is take something like the Holocaust,
Okay.
right? That's a tragedy, but an evil experience, like an evil doing that affected a community of people. Now, if we only look at each individual story as like their hero's journey, like they're being tested, it kind of detracts away from the evilness of the act itself, of like the concentration camps and all the other things that they were involved. It takes also away the community experience, which is very big and powerful, of that life experience that they all went through, people who are involved. So I think I understand that criticism, but I also think that perhaps that's more about a Thompson thing versus this structure thing. Because I don't think the intent of this hero's journey is to minimize any kind of experience, community or individual. I think it's a way of like identifying that we can overcome a lot of obstacles. I don't think we can overcome all obstacles, but we can overcome a lot of obstacles in life, and we can use them to make meaning and build ourselves and like hopefully become stronger and better people through them. So
Well,
that's
that's
one
you're
thing I
making a
heard.
great point, and I've heard, Nietzsche kind of criticized the same way when he talks about, or even you could probably criticize Adler the same way. When if you talk about like what drives human beings is a will to power, right? That's very individualist. Like I want to become
Yeah.
the best version of myself. Well, what does that mean for everybody else? Like, you know what I mean?
Okay. Yep.
So like that makes complete sense. But I think also what we're talking about here is, so what the Nazis were doing were there's this great little there's this great little story about how, leafs, they kind of like turn, they automatically know where the sun is, and they all kind of turn towards the sun and follow the sun. And someone was like watching this happen. They're like, wow, that would be like the loss of human consciousness if we all just looked the same way towards something mindlessly. And that's what kind of happened with the Nazis.
Oh,
Now,
that's
what
like koi fish.
Exactly. So that's like so that's the hero. The hero is someone who kind of knows what everyone else is doing and says like, wait a minute, like this isn't right. There's something bigger and I have to do something about this. And what heroes, I think, if anything else, give us is something to emulate, something to see and to say like, okay, like I have something to admire here. And what is it about this story or this person's arc that I admire? And you can kind of frame your life that way and figure out something that you can do that's sort of comparative, where you can kind of go on your own journey or your own take your own stand and do something bigger than you. And another thing that he mentions is I thought was really interesting is he talks about how he once went into a cathedral and he was in New York City and you're in the hustle and bustle of New York City in the 80s and it's like a lot of crime, whatever. And then you go into this like really spiritual place and it's quiet and you're taken out of one world and you're brought into another. And you see like when you're brought into a religious place like that, yeah, these are heroes. Like Jesus is a hero. He's like the ultimate hero's journey. And throughout history, these buildings were the most important place. They're the biggest place, medieval cathedrals and Gothic cathedrals. These were the biggest, most imposing places in the world. So it's like this is what we kind of looked up to. And this is where we could kind of find people to emulate. And now, if you look at throughout society and find the biggest buildings and you go inside of them, like who are those devoted to? Like we kind of lost our way a little bit, don't you think? Like, because these are like, I don't know, corporate shitholes. I mean, there's no beauty, there's no spirituality. And I think like s- not really focusing on the hero's journey in society and like emulating heroes is a real kind of downgrade in human nature, I think.
Yeah.
Lost something.
Just kind of like a little side note. I've been doing at my other job, I've been doing a lot of like one-on-one interviews with individuals with disabilities. And one of the things that's come up a lot is I ask them kind of like if you could give advice to people who struggle with like whatever it is that they struggle with, what would that advice be? And the themes that I keep getting from these individuals are so interesting and compelling. But it all comes back to the same thing. Like today, an individual who is blind, he has epilepsy, but he's like super funny and like laughing and constantly telling jokes. And he's obsessed with podcasts and things like that. He's like, I was like, what advice would you give to someone who's like struggling with some of similar things you struggle with and how to live like a happy life? And it's like, um, do more of the things you enjoy is basically the theme of what he said. He's like, read more books, listen to true crime podcasts. It's like, but it was basically he's just saying all the things he loves. And it's like, all right, well, that's part of the key to living like a happy life is engage in the things you love. Do more of it instead of focusing on what the problems are. And another individual I talked to who's dealing with like the grief of losing his mom was like, I was like, what's important to you? And he's like, all the people that are around you and spending time with them and, doing things that make you happy. It's just really interesting when we think about like how we overcome things. And I think that people sometimes lose sight that like some of the answers are right in front of us.
Mhm.
And being a hero doesn't always mean the same thing, right? Like being strong and overcoming challenges, whether it's like depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's grief, whether it's just being able to deal with the fact that you have this thing that will never change, like being blind or deaf or, having some kind of pain or, like you're a hero if you're able to continue to live a meaningful and productive life and stay happy and be a good person while dealing with those things, right? So like there's different forms of heroes journeys that I think we need to really highlight. It's not always just like these big changes that people need to make.
Yeah, that's like a really beautiful sentiment actually. Like these people that are struggling with like things that most of us would be, I mean, talk about limiting beliefs, like we would think we would really hit a wall with.
Yeah.
And they're saying like, look, hey, like there's things that happen to me that are unfair and unjust and out of my control, but I'm gonna do what I think is good anyway. I'm gonna live my life in a beautiful way anyway. And that you're right, that's what being a hero is. And it's even making me think like, just telling you how like I'm not gonna be able to come in tomorrow because I have a sick kid, and it's like, feeling terrible about that. But then I'm thinking like, you know what? I there's a right thing to do here, and it's like spend time with this little guy who's sick, and I'm not gonna I'm gonna do what I think is right and just put down the responsibilities for a second and like, am I a hero? Maybe a little bit. You know what I mean? Like
Am I
I, you
a
know what I mean? Like
hero right now?
yeah, yeah. Like if I call in and be like, well, why are you calling in? Because I'm a hero.
Yeah.
Click. You know what I mean? I know really like it's like putting, I don't know. It's like knowing what the right thing is, knowing what societal pressure is, and knowing like following your values despite that. It's like that's all part of it.
Yeah.
Also, like I read, I love philosophy, you know that, and I read like Plutarch, who is this, he's a historian, but he tells like stories about like Alexander the Great and Caesar and all these like great people throughout history and people who you've never heard of, but he just compares them in a way where it's like he shows their values and it was kind of making me think about that because it's like a culture's heroes, like these people who are heroes in a culture, is that culture's identity. So it made me think for a second, well, who is our culture's heroes right now? Like, you know what I mean, Dave? Like, like, because if you think about your culture, you're here. Like, we talk about great cultures like Greece and Rome at the time, and like they have like Marcus Aurelius and Julius Caesar, and they have these like incredible leaders and warriors, and and Alexander the Great, and it's like, well, all right, who's our heroes right now? Really?
But this goes back to our celebrity episode. Remember that? And it was like the things that we valued for celebrity back in the day has totally shifted because we used to look at people like soldiers and
Yeah,
people that like fought for us to people who provided services for
yeah,
us. We used to look at them in that light, and now it's like actors, athletes.
yeah. It's like think about who you're trying to emulate, and then like think about why. Like, is that someone you really admire? Or do we
I
need to go
do,
to antiquity to find people like that?
I do love a person who has a spotlight on them that is also like utilizing that spotlight to do good, right? Or like athletes you see that are giving back to the community, or like things like that. I think those are the people that need more attention, but unfortunately, in our society, we love drama, we love conflict, and those are rarely the individuals that are engaging in that stuff. And we tend to not give them the proper spotlight. Like they might get a glimpse, but then we shift it to like, oh well, so and so is suspended for 5 games for gun possession
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
DUI.
And you're
You know,
wearing his name on your shirt, and
as
it's
he
like, wait a
releases
minute,
a
what's
new
going
pair
on
of
here?
shoes. And I'm not even
Yeah,
hating because like I'm a fan of like a lot of sports and athletes, and like they don't always engage in the best behavior, but like I get what you're saying. I think you're right. I think our society has kind of lost its way with the way that we have put so much stock in people that I don't think they necessarily are signing up to be heroes. I think they just
yeah.
have a skill and they're utilizing it for, the way they should.
And that's the problem. They're not signing up to be heroes. And it used to be that being a hero or having courage and all these like almost like knightly virtues um that used to be so honored are kind of like nothing anymore. And it's funny because I remember a few episodes or maybe even like 10 episodes ago or whatever, I was telling you about this thing where I would either say, would you rather be, a whale in the aquarium or a whale in the ocean? Or would you rather be, this sailor on the beach and he's telling the story about this crazy ship that almost sank and it was in the storm and there were waves crashing. Would you rather be the sailor telling the story who went through this ordeal, or would you rather be the guy standing on the beach listening? And what I've been noticing is this idea really backfiring a little bit on me, where I've gotten people saying, like, I just want to be the whale in the aquarium, or I just want to be the guy listening to the story. I don't want to be the guy who's telling the story because he had to go through all that. And it's like, yeah, but what? I mean, even like I'm thinking like it's not obvious anymore. Like that value of wanting to be in it, wanting to have experienced it instead of just hear about it is kind of gone. And that scares me. And that scares me because that's how you become good. That's how you become strong through adversity. Like you literally can't grow without some kind of, friction,
Yeah.
pushback. It's impossible.
But people don't want to necessarily sign up for that kind of journey. You know, it's like we want to watch that journey. We don't want to be in that journey.
Yeah. Why? That's what I'm wondering.
You know, but we are a society that avoids discomfort at all costs, and we see that all the time,
Mhm.
avoidance. You know, and I just think that that has a lot to do with it. We don't want to feel discomfort, whatever feeling that may be.
Even though, like, all the research shows if you intentionally put yourself through discomfort, for periods of time, even boredom, like, the payback is, like, incredible. Like, you can handle so much more. Like, if
Right.
you do hard things, you know what I mean? Like, purposefully.
We know, but it just it doesn't connect for us for some reason. We still engage in it all the time. If it was that easy, like our job would be pretty much like a quarter of the
Yeah, that's
intensity
true.
that it is. Like how
Yeah.
many people do we have to talk about like that surfing the urge thing with like cutting behavior or you know, BPD symptoms? It's like you have to like embrace discomfort. Stop trying to avoid discomfort. Stop having conflicts because you think the one thing you're going to say is going to change everything. Just sit there and be uncomfortable for a little bit, and then
Yeah,
a lot of you will be stronger for it.
absolutely, and that's
But
well said. It really is. David, have you ever, like, have your own examples of, like, small heroes' journeys in your life?
um eh,
I bet you if I can think of one for you, I mean, this, like, empire, sort of horror empire that you've created with your friend there, it seems like Brandon, it seems like that had to have at some point been like, "Nah, this isn't gonna work. This is
oh
too
yeah,
hard."
I mean for sure there's been a lot of that within that project, and recently it's we've had a lot of like achievements and things to like be proud of, but it's there was a lot of yeah, a lot of turmoil at one point that it like almost caused us to hang it up. So I mean that I would say that I mean even doing this and some of
Mhm.
the difficulties and also some of the
Absolutely.
challenges, but also the achievements within this show. Um, yeah, work. I mean, I see it all the time, and like I'm way more cognizant of it in my later years
Mhm.
as I embrace like being over the halfway point probably of life, and
Yeah,
you know,
well, right around there. Yeah, and, it's like one of those things. It's funny that you say that, how you, like, embrace it later on in life and you kind of notice it more, which I think is, like, having this awareness is a really important thing. And maybe it does come with age. You're probably right. Where it's like, things can happen in my life that are kind of like, ugh, that's a setback, or ugh, that's not really going my way. But it's like, well, look, what's the alternative? Like, I've got work to do here, and I've devoted so much of my life to this or that, and, like, I'm gonna keep doing what I think is good, keep doing what I think is right, and I think eventually things will just fall into place. And if they don't, what difference does it make? Because I mean, I'm not going to change, like, my values because things aren't going exactly the way I wanted to. Because that's what you have to remember too. Not every story is going to end up with, like, the princess and how everything's supposed to go. It's
yeah.
like you're just all kind of doing our best here. And are you happy with who you are? And are you proud? Can you admire yourself? I think that's, again, always kind of comes back to that. Is that the question, right? Like, am I behaving in a way that I admire? And I think that's essentially what the hero's journey boils down to. And I've been telling you this for a while. That's what everything boils down to.
I
Am I?
think the biggest thing that people need to be looking for though, they need to be looking for the calling.
Hmm.
If you miss the calling, you miss your opportunity. And when you get that calling, understand it is a journey. It is not a clear path. It is a journey, and it's not going to be short and it's not going to be easy, but the outcome will be the justification. The end justifies the means. Isn't that what they always say?
It is.
I don't
And I'll
think
tell
that's
you,
always used in that context, but you know,
it was funnily enough, it was used in greed a lot. We talked about that, but I think, Dave, that you're right. the calling, and how do we feel a calling? How do we feel like this urge to like what being called to action? Like, what does that feel
Yeah.
like? It's
I
called
don't I
anxiety, baby, right?
it's anxiety, right? And here's the thing, I think that, like, so many times we just ignore it because
Mm,
we don't
let's
know.
avoid
Like,
it. How do I get
it
rid of this feeling?
I think people always assume it's gonna be like this big moment, like a big decision I have to make. Sure, those are gonna happen in life, 100%, but it's not always just that big thing. This is why, and I think you're in the same boat with me. Like, I'm constantly saying yes to opportunities. I have such a hard time nowadays to say no because, like, I've learned over time, and it took me a very long time to realize this, you never know what
Mhm.
that taking that opportunity, what new doors that's going to open. And that is part of, to me, that's also part of the hero's journey, is like just being a yes man, saying yes to opportunity and seeing where it's going to go.
And not being afraid to not know crap about it. You know what I mean? Like, not
Yes.
being afraid to not to like, "Oh, I might not be so good at this," or like, I'm new at this. I'm gonna have a lot of questions. I'm not really gonna know what's going on." So what? Like, you have to do that. You have to put yourself to grow, you have to be willing to be kind of the dopey one for a little bit, the
Yeah.
one who doesn't know everything, and that's okay.
I know, like, we're pretty much done with this pretty soon, but I just wanted to share a little quick one. So I
Yeah,
have this
sure.
individual who I work with who is on the autism spectrum. He's such a great guy. He's so funny. But he's like telling me, and I'm always trying to push him to be more social. He stays inside. He plays a lot of online gaming, doesn't really have a lot of in-person friends right now. And we're always talking about, how do you get you out? How do I get you out doing things? Um, he told me, like, oh, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons. So immediately as he's telling me this, I like go to my computer and I look up in-person Dungeons and Dragons events happening. And I was like, oh wow, look at this. It looks like there's every Wednesday a Dungeons and Dragons night that's like right around the corner from your house. How amazing is that?
Mm.
He's like, I don't know. I'm not really good. I was like, all right, we'll see. It was so awesome. I see him 2 weeks later and he tells me, and he brought it up super casually as if like maybe he didn't think I would notice. But he's like, yeah, 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 it's right near that place where the Dungeons and Dragon things is. And I'm like, wait a minute. Did you? And he goes, I had mom drive me by. I just wanted to check it out and see how far it
Huge
is from the
step.
house. And I was like, that means you're contemplating it. And that
Mhm.
means that you actually took a step to scope it out. It's like, and like, I know he's on his hero's journey. And it's like so freaking heartwarming to me because it's like, it just that one conversation stuck in his head and he's like deciding, and I see it is like on the fence, like, do I do it, do I not do it? I know he's gonna like, he's finding all those ways to talk himself out of it, but there's a part of him that really wants to embrace that journey. And like,
And,
I
it's
feel like I'm that facilitator. I'm, that guy that's gonna, you know hopefully get him to just cross that threshold.
Dave, it's that's perfect, and, like, just using the word hero sort of changes everything too. It changes your mentality. It's like, "Alright, it's like things happen to me." In life, and that's hard, right? But if you're like, well, I'm approaching the world as a hero now. It's like, well, yeah, of course things are gonna happen to me. Like that's what I'm signing up for. That's part of what being a hero's journey is. Like
Yeah, no,
hard things are gonna happen, and that's what's gonna make me this hero. That's
right.
what's gonna, that's part of it.
It can't
So
be
it's like
boring.
it's yeah, it's like this powerful sort of like things are gonna happen to me, unfair, unjust, and it's not gonna be easy. Life's gonna be hard. It's gonna throw a lot at me. And that looking at that in a way of like a victim, or you can look at that in the way of a hero and expect it and welcome it and know that it's gonna be formative. That's what I think the huge difference is. And like you view the world as a hero, like this journey, and it's like it's helpful because you feel connected to the rest of the world. They've been writing stories about this forever. It's like you're part of this group of elite people who just view their life this way where they don't care. They're just going to do something. Like no one, you know, Alexander the Great didn't say like, "Oh man, I had a hard day today." Like or things, so and so was like gave me a hard time today, or does how does he feel about me today? And it's like, no, dude, I got shit to do. I'm on my way to something, and I that's all I see is the destination. I can envision this meaningful future, and nothing's gonna get in my way. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
And I love that you put in the notes that we didn't even get a chance to mention here is like Joan of Arc and any civil rights figure. That's fucking 1000%. How much pushback for Martin Luther King? I mean,
Right.
that's why we're talking like how much
I
pushback
heard
Joan of
someone
Arc.
mention Rosa Parks, and I was like, that's a
Absolutely.
great example right there.
You know, she
Um,
was like, "This is a terrible idea," and people like her family was like, "Don't do that." Even though, like, I think there's more to that story, and it was actually someone else who was sitting on who actually did that first.
yeah.
But whatever, that doesn't really matter. It's what's important is like, I mean, the courage that it takes to say like, I'm not gonna keep going. I'm gonna do something bigger than myself. Like then nothing else matters,
Yeah.
right? It's all kind
I'm
of
gonna be I want to start the change that I want to see.
that's right. I think that's we can leave it on that.
Yeah.
That's it
All
right there.
right. That is a hero's journey, everyone. You're welcome.
Yeah. And I hope we weren't just babbling because but I actually had like a really good time talking about that because I think it is important. And I think finding ways to like change your perception and recalibrate your frame of mind is kind of what we're trying to do here. And here's just like another tool, you know?
Yeah.
Like w- if Frodo, because we've all seen that, isn't or read that at least isn't working towards like this huge thing. Like if he wasn't working towards that, then any one of those things that happened to him is crippling and ruining and his life sucks. But because all those things happen to him, he's like he makes it through it all and it's like he's way more than he could have ever been without it. I
And
think
then him and
that's
all of his little friends all jump on a bed at the end, and it's
just
so
kiss.
fun. There's like one of them. It ends with them like jumping up and down on a bed. It's
And
like
like
this is
laughing all
weird.
weird. Like
Yeah,
ha 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 ha.
this is strange.
Like, all right, I don't know about that.
So if
Yeah,
you leave a rating and review on Apple this week, Greg is going to read you one of his heroes
that's right.
stories, his hero journey stories.
Mhm. I
All right.
will.
He's going to read it. He's going to send you a voice recording of it,
Hmm.
for, and you will be able to listen to it
I'll
at your
even send
leisure.
you a mustache hair in a bag if
Gross.
that's what it takes. I
Gross.
mean, I'll do whatever it takes. We're really kind of
Don't threaten them, Greg.
we're really kind of pulling for a review here, people. I don't know if you can tell. Um,
You missed your ghost story, but you can get
yeah,
a hero's journey.
I'm still willing to do the ghost story if someone can just reach out.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, as we mentioned, rating and review on Apple or wherever you're listening would be greatly appreciated. Don't forget, we are also live on video, not live, but we're, you know, visible on video on the YouTube station. So check that out. Make sure you like and subscribe. And if you want to support the show, which we would greatly appreciate because it does help, we have a support the show Buzzsprout page. You can find it on our social media on Instagram. And speaking of social media, we're on most platforms, probably most active on Instagram, if you can actually call that active. Other than that, we will see you next week. And we will, as you can tell, we're back to some less spooky stuff this month.
Hmm.
So next week, I think we're going to dive into one of our like diagnoses or disorder episodes. So you'll see what that is when we get there. Spoiler, it affects the elderly mostly, except if you're
Okay.
Julianne Moore. Um, Spoiler
ED.
alert. ED.
Yeah,
Yikes. All right. Good night, everyone. We'll see you later. Greg's being naughty.
I'm being silly.
He's
It's getting
got to
late.
go to bed. All right. Goodbye.
Bye.